Native Son by Richard Wright is a powerful novel that explores the struggles of African Americans living in Chicago during the 1930s. The story follows Bigger Thomas, a young black man who lives in poverty with his mother and siblings in a cramped apartment on the south side of Chicago. Despite his intelligence, Bigger is trapped in a cycle of poverty and crime, struggling to make ends meet and feeling trapped by the society he lives in. The novel is divided into 3 parts, each of which explores a different aspect of Bigger's life and his interactions with the world around him. In the first part, Bigger is hired as a chauffeur for the wealthy and liberal Dalton family. Though he is initially excited by the job, he quickly becomes uncomfortable with the Daltons' well-meaning but clueless attempts to relate to him as an African American. Bigger's sense of alienation and frustration reaches a breaking point when he accidentally kills Mary Dalton, the daughter of his employers, after a night of heavy drinking and drug use. Bigger knows that he is in a precarious position, as he is a black man accused of murdering a white woman. Fearing for his life, he attempts to cover up his crime and evade the police. In the second part of the novel, Bigger is captured by the police and put on trial. The trial serves as a commentary on the injustices of the American criminal justice system, particularly in the way that it is rigged against African Americans. Bigger is represented by a well-meaning but inexperienced white lawyer who fails to understand the cultural and social factors that led to Bigger's crime. Meanwhile, the prosecutor uses every opportunity to stoke racial tensions and portray Bigger as a violent, bestial creature who is a danger to society. Despite the efforts of Bigger's defense team, he is eventually found guilty and sentenced to death. The final part of the novel takes place in the days leading up to Bigger's execution. Bigger is visited in prison by Max, a communist lawyer who has taken an interest in his case. Max tries to convince Bigger that his crime was not his fault, but rather the result of the oppressive society in which he lives. Max argues that only through a socialist revolution can African Americans achieve true equality and freedom. While Bigger is initially resistant to Max's ideas, he eventually comes to see the truth in them and begins to embrace a new sense of purpose and hope. One of the most striking aspects of Native Son is the way in which Wright portrays the pervasive racism and prejudice that Bigger encounters at every turn. From his encounters with the Daltons, who see him as a well-behaved but ultimately subservient employee, to his experiences with the police and the justice system, which are rigged against him from the start, Bigger is constantly reminded of his inferior status in American society. Wright's vivid descriptions of the poverty and squalor of the South Side of Chicago also serve to underscore the ways in which systemic racism has kept African Americans trapped in a cycle of poverty and crime. Despite the grim subject matter of the novel, Wright also offers a powerful message of hope and resistance. Through Bigger's interactions with Max, he shows that even in the darkest of circumstances, it is possible to find a way forward and to work towards a better future. The novel's final scene, in which Bigger embraces the possibility of a new, socialist world, offers a glimmer of hope in the face of the overwhelming forces of racism and oppression. In conclusion, Native Son is a powerful and important novel that offers a searing critique of American society and the ways in which racism and prejudice have been ingrained into the fabric of the country. Through Bigger's struggles, Wright exposes the deep injustices, and eventually, Bigger's crimes catch up to him and he is captured and put on trial. The trial becomes a media sensation, with reporters and activists from both sides descending on Chicago. Bigger initially tries to plead guilty, but his lawyer insists on a not guilty plea and attempts to argue that Bigger's actions were a product of his environment and the systemic racism he faced. Despite this defense, Bigger is found guilty and sentenced to death. Throughout the novel, Wright exposes the many ways that racism is deeply ingrained in American society. Bigger's story shows how even the most well-intentioned white people can perpetuate systemic racism, whether through their own prejudices or their ignorance of the struggles faced by Black Americans. The novel also illustrates the devastating effects that poverty, lack of education, and limited opportunities have on individuals and communities. Despite the grim subject matter, Native Son is a powerful and important work of literature that continues to resonate with readers today. Through Bigger's story, Wright forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our society and the systemic inequalities that still exist.